And thank you for joining us here in the KRQE News 13 Digital Studio. I'm Chris McKee here, joined with Ann Perrett, who is a guest here again to talk about her latest investigation. Ann, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me, Chris.
So this investigation you've got going here online now, which you can view on krqe.com as well. We'll post a link to it in the story where you may be watching this video interview here. But this story about gun crime, essentially, and you noticed something in particular in the metro area here in Albuquerque, Bernalillo County, of course, the largest city in the state, the most people here, and the most crime certainly happens here. So a big focal point for the state of New Mexico. A particular gun crime is getting more attention, but maybe in your own words, what is this story sort of, how do you describe it?
Yes, so very specific type of gun crime. This investigation looks at the crime of straw purchasing, and that's when someone goes into a store, they go to purchase a gun. They have to fill out a form, an ATF form on there saying that this gun is for them. And in doing so, the crime is that they lie on the form saying that it's for them, but then when they leave the store, they turn around, they give it to somebody else who maybe pays them for it, gives in whether cash or drugs, or maybe it's a family member who pressured them into doing that. But why this typically happens is because there are certain people who cannot just go into a gun store and buy a gun. People who are underage, people who have a criminal record, so they ask somebody else to do it for them, and that's kind of what we started looking at. We just saw a number of criminal complaints, search warrants specific to this crime popping up this past year in the federal court records. And so it just kind of sparked our interest, and sure enough, the U.S. Attorney confirmed that, yeah, they are focusing more on this crime, trying to crack down on it quite a bit more. So talked to the U.S. Attorney, talked to the ATF about it, and highlighted several cases.
And again, if you haven't checked out this story yet, it's a good precursor to the conversation we're having here. Again, there's a link to it within the article here on krqe.com where this video lives here as well. So you heard about this essentially by looking at the details, the numbers here behind this particular crime. How did you sort of do the work in processing that data or figuring out the numbers behind your story? Because, you know, sometimes you can see, you know, types of cases in a system, but it may not tell the whole picture. How did you sort of verify, process the numbers, and how many cases you were seeing?
You're right, because we weren't looking for this in 2021, right? But it was actually one of our bosses who had found a lot of these search warrants, a lot of these criminal complaints, and he's been here for a minute, so he was like, I've never seen this before. I reached out to the U.S. Attorney's Office. They confirmed, yes, there is a difference in the number of cases that you're seeing. From the ATF, you know, they said this is something we're always focused on, so it really isn't a new effort on our end. It seemed like the new effort really came from the U.S. Attorney's Office. The U.S. Attorney, he just became New Mexico's U.S. Attorney in May.
Alexander Ubaez.
Correct. Yeah. So that's really when he said this uptick started.
So why is this crime getting more attention? Did you get into an indication as to why, and why do you think maybe?
You know, crime in general right now is getting a lot of attention, right? I mean, that's been a conversation for the better part of a year at this point. The crimes being committed typically involve guns, right? And so it also is typically the same perpetrators committing these crimes. So then the question is, well, how are these people getting guns when they are prohibited persons who, you know, probably have a felony record? You can't go in and buy a gun. So how is this happening? It was a big question actually on social media after Solomon Pena was arrested. He's the man who police say kind of orchestrated the shootings at the elected officials' homes these past 2 months. The question we just kept seeing on there was, how on earth did he get a gun? How did he get access to a gun?
Because he previously had felony charges on his record.
Exactly, yes. Yeah, thanks for clarifying. So, yeah, with that, you know, the ATF says, yes, of course, as we all suspect and as we all kind of know, guns are stolen, right? Out of cars, out of stores, homes. But the majority of the time, the ATF says it's straw purchases that are supplying gang members, convicted criminals, violent kids, people who just really shouldn't be having guns, who can't walk into a gun store, right, and purchase their own gun.
So let's dive a little bit more into the numbers here that you put together. I know they're not all entirely presented in the story, so that's why we wanted to kind of carve out some time here in our discussion to talk about just how much more prosecution is happening. So you looked up the straw purchase cases the feds have prosecuted over the last decade, it sounds like. In the story, you had mentioned that there was just one case prosecuted a decade ago, and by that you mean by calendar year 2013, essentially, or 20?
Yes.
Okay, 2013. So 10 years ago, this one number is very low, and then now this number is very high. So how much more prosecution are we talking about? I know we made some graphics here just to kind of illustrate the point, and I'll put this first one up here.
Yeah, so I mean, even 2012 as well, which is probably more accurate because the numbers we were looking at for cases would be 2022. But
yeah, 2023 has not fully happened yet.
Correct. Yeah. So you can see, I mean, these are low numbers. And if you go to the next few years, the next 5 years, it's kind of interesting, you know. You go from 1 to 8, and it's like, okay, 8 is not in double digits. It doesn't seem like that much. But when you look at a crime that's difficult to prove, and we talk about that in the investigation, 8 is a lot higher, right?
Yeah.
But not to mention that there are several search warrants, we mentioned some of those in the story as well, that have not yet led to charges. So we may be seeing those charges here in 2023. So it'll be interesting to see the number this year. But yes, just 8 last year, but that really is a whole lot higher than just one a decade ago, and just kind of proves that they are paying closer attention to it.
Yeah, and these numbers on your screen right here from some of those initial early years, and yeah, just a stark difference when we look at the more recent years. 1 versus 8, a far different workload for sure.
And if I could point out too, you know, one case doesn't mean one gun straw purchased. We have somebody that we highlight in this case, Larry Archuleta. He was charged. He's accused of buying 33 guns at 3 gun stores within just 5 months, all here in Albuquerque. The feds say that he was supplying a local Albuquerque street gang with those guns, rifles, shotguns, pistols. So you have to think about, you know, what they're really cracking down on too when you catch one of these defendants. So one defendant doesn't just mean one gun on the street. In this case, he was charged with straw purchasing 24 of those 33 guns. So 24 guns on the street as a result of this guy.
Wow. And
then the other thing too, these investigations are leading to other investigations, which we do typically see that quite a bit. But the U.S. Attorney mentions in the story, you know, it's led to them kind of looking closer at the fentanyl crisis. He said he actually met with officials in Mexico City this past year because what he started noticing was it's the same people who are bringing guns down to Mexico. That group down there receiving those guns are supplying fentanyl here to New Mexico. So, you know, there's just a lot that kind of, the ripple effect, right? This isn't just, it isn't always just a family member buying a gun for somebody else. Sometimes this is much larger than that.
Okay. So we know as well, I've been here in Albuquerque for the last 10 years, and certainly I have seen this pattern play out that the feds can be pretty mute about the work that they do. When they have something to say, they will make sure that you know they're about to say it. But when they are just working on their cases in the background, it's kind of like one of those things, almost a good luck in getting them to acknowledge anything. So this type of story stands out to me because it does seem to be of a different chapter of sort of addressing the work that they're doing. And so I wanted to ask you a little bit about the approach that they had towards this story. What what was their approach towards speaking about this issue?
Well, for one, we couldn't talk about specific cases. One of the rules with federal cases is you cannot get them, or they cannot speak on the record about any of these cases until they're closed. Of course, if somebody was just charged in 2022, these are federal cases. As we know, some criminal cases take some time to play out through the courts. So only one of these is actually closed at this point that we highlighted in the case, and it actually stems back to 2021. So, of course, it took a little more than a year for that case to play out. So the U.S. Attorney just was willing to kind of talk in
generalities, maybe?
Yes, the ATF as well. But you can tell that this is something that's important to them. It's something that they're noticing. It's something that they've been focusing on. And so really the goal was just kind of educating people, because it doesn't seem like a crime, right? You go in, you buy a gun. It's like, oh, I went in and I bought sneakers for somebody else. You know, sometimes they were saying people don't realize how serious this really is. But of course, it's a gun, and you know, a gun can be deadly. It can cause a lot of harm. But in conversations too with the U.S. Attorney, again, he took over in May, U.S. Attorney Alexander Ubaez, I've really kind of learned that he is really eager to educate. He knows that we all think that his job, his office is very secretive, and so he wants to kind of get the word out more about what they're doing, the hard work, the effort behind the scenes to really educate the community on the impact that they can and are making.
I know technology has often been highlighted in some of even the most recent criminal cases. You mentioned Solomon Pena. We know technology was central to helping sort of crack the narrative on that case. But I wanted to ask, in the context of this conversation, what technology is being used to maybe address straw purchasing?
Yes, so e-tracing is critical, and you have to have the actual gun to be able to perform an e-trace. Any police agency in the country, once they get a gun, they can take that gun, enter the serial number into the ATF website. ATF analysts look at that. They are able, typically within 24 hours, Albuquerque police told us, come back with who bought the gun, where and when they did so. That typically indicates, you know, if it's, you know, say it's recovered by police, 70 days, 100 days, less than a year typically from when it was purchased. That typically indicates a straw purchase. That's called the time to crime, from when police recovered it going back to when it was purchased. But on top of that, time to use is also used in these investigations, and that comes from NIBIN, because with NIBIN, which we highlighted, as you mentioned with the Solomon Pena case, that's with casings specifically. You do eventually need the firearm, but you pick up casings on scene, enter those into the NIBIN system. Both state police and Albuquerque police here in New Mexico have those machines. That information goes in. Every casing fired has a specific fingerprint on it that is specific to the gun that fired it. So then you're able to go from there. You can kind of, once you get the gun, confirm, okay, this gun is connected to these crime scenes are connected, then you kind of know time to use, right? So then that allows you to, in conjunction with each race, confirm whether or not something was straw purchased. The problem, though, with e-trace, not every police agency uses it. The ATF says only 50% of police agencies across the country use it. In our story, we did speak with Albuquerque police. Every single gun that comes in to their office that has a criminal nexus, they're tracing it. But yeah, it's just not something that everybody uses, so you don't always know how big, I guess, when I asked the ATF, how big of a problem is this? Are guns being straw purchased every day, once a week? You know, what's going on? He's like, we can't know, because not every police agency is doing that. And it's fairly simple, he said, too, but not every police agency has the staffing to be able to take the time to do that.
Yeah, databases take time to enter numbers into.
Yes.
Interesting.
Yes.
So the issue obviously has gotten attention based on your story on the federal level, but I wanted to also talk about the state level, sort of what attention we're seeing paid towards straw purchasing, maybe even with state law. So I wanted to pull up one thing that the governor spoke of during her 2023 State of the State just last month in January. She said, along with calling for a ban on assault weapons, you see in that first quote there, the second quote from her State of the State was, "I am calling for an end to the state loophole on straw purchases of guns because people with a history of violence should not be able to exploit the system to get firearms," unquote. So that was a quote from the governor during, again, the State of the State session. She did not really elaborate more on that, but we do know a little bit more on maybe what the pursual of that legislatively will look like. I understand there's a bill out there, but maybe not too many specifics on it. Can you just tell us, what do we know about this bill so far?
Yes, she actually, the governor held a press conference last week with a number of different law enforcement officials, as well as, top lawmakers. And it was mentioned that there will be a bill regarding straw purchases. The problem, we haven't seen it yet. It's not yet up on the website, even saying that's going to be introduced soon. Of course, this is a 60-day session, so there's plenty of time still. We will be paying attention to that. So it's hard to speak to exactly what it's going to entail because we just haven't seen it yet.
Yeah.
Could be stricter penalties, could be more staff, could be more money, towards the investigations. We don't know. On that, I mean, these investigations, this is a difficult crime to prove. And the ATF admits that. You or I, we could walk into the store, say, I'm buying this gun for me, sign the paperwork. Who's going to say anything? It's the Larry Archulettas who come into the store 17 times, right, within a few months. And you're like, something's suspicious here. So maybe there's something in the bill about gun store employees paying closer attention and doing more. We do know that they play a fairly large role in the ATF's investigations right now. They're vigilant, they're paying attention, but yeah, no word yet on that. We will be paying attention to that, though.
Yeah, and I do think one thing that's interesting to note about the bill is supposedly it will be carried by Ryan Lane. He is a second-term Republican House rep up from the Aztec area in northwest Albuquerque. He is also the minority leader for the party right now, and as well, Lane, a Republican, leading the opposition party, sitting, shoulder to shoulder essentially with the governor, saying that he wants to see this issue addressed. So that is going to be interesting to see what traction that bill may get, what criticism it may get as well, since it is slated to come from an opposing party.
Yeah, we'll be paying attention for sure.
Yeah. Well, Ann, we appreciate you doing the work on this story, bringing it to our attention here. How can people reach you if they've got a story idea? What's the best way to do that?
On social media, it's always at Ann Perrett. Through email, it's ann.perrett@krqe.com.
Okay. Ann, thanks again.
Thanks for letting me talk about this, Chris. I appreciate it.